Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation event. And I want to thank the Foundation for hosting this important convening. We're hoping that today's conversation will spark some dialogue and hopefully some fresh thinking among those of you who are gathered here about the workplace itself. And what we're going to be discussing today is a critical question that's become, in some sense, even more critical because of the pandemic, which is how can workplaces, particularly in small and medium-sized businesses, create the conditions and cultures for their people to thrive, recognizing that thriving contributes to productivity, to retention, to all the things that we want in a workplace. Now, I've invited two very exciting and accomplished leaders to be with us today to talk a bit about their own experiences in prioritizing mental health at their companies to help spark this dialogue. And we did this in particular because mental health is just at the center of many people's concerns, especially after the pandemic. We know that in a time being called the Great Resignation, when many people are leaving their jobs, many of them even without having a new job in hand, that one of the things that people are looking for is an experience at work that will ultimately support their well-being. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is, what that looks like, and what a workplace can do actually create the settings that enable a workplace to be an engine of mental health and well-being. So the two individuals I'm grateful to have with me today are Andy Katz-Mayfield, the co-founder and CEO of Harry's, and which is, as many of you know, a subscription shaving supplies company. And I'm also grateful to have Andre Blackman, who is the CEO of Onboard Health, a specialized executive search and talent advisory firm, which is dedicated to building a more equitable health future. And my hope is that at the end of this conversation, you'll be able to walk away feeling ready to take the first step in cultivating greater mental health and overall well-being within your workforce. So with that, welcome, Andre and Andy. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Now, the first question I want to pose to you, is this. Both of you are leaders who I think have been ahead of the curve in seeing mental health as a key part of your organization. This is something that really resonates with me because as Surgeon General, one of my key priorities is to focus on mental health, recognizing just how much of our health and well-being has been impacted during this pandemic, but also how much we were struggling with mental health before the pandemic. As you know, better than anyone, our struggles with mental health have downstream impacts on our physical health, on how our kids do in school, and with how people perform in the workplace. So I've been really encouraged by what both of you are doing in your organization. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what informed your way of thinking about why mental health is so business critical. And I'm curious how you decided to approach it in your workplace.
Sure. Well, I can go first. I think about, at Harry's that we think about mental health through both an external, lens and how we orient ourselves to customers in our community, and then also internal. And by way of background, when we started Harry's back in 2013, social mission was always sort of at the, forefront and core of what we do. So we set aside 1% of our sales to contribute to social partners and social causes. And around 2018, so about 5 years into our company's journey, we decided to focus all of those efforts really on mental health and specifically providing men with better access to mental health care, working with organizations in that space, and particularly organizations who are focused on the most at-risk communities like veterans, LGBTQ, Black youth, homeless, et cetera. And we've donated $6 million to our nonprofit partners, helped over 850,000 men access mental health, and our goal is to get that number up to 1.5 million by 2024. So, we have this, I'd say, strong external orientation, and our current big initiative is called Open Minds, where we have a $5 million grant that's going to be awarded to a nonprofit in early 2022, with the idea of changing the state of mental health in the US. And as we were evolving our social mission to, be really exclusively focused on mental health care, I think it actually caused us to look internally as a company and say, well, look, if we're going to be trying to sort of move the needle externally and take this progressive view on mental health externally, we better make sure that we're making those same efforts internally. And, we've decided to, there's a whole host of things that we do. We can get into more detail there, but, As an example, we provide employees access to sort of well-being programs, a quarterly stipend around that. We have company-wide mental health days. We encourage folks to take days off to volunteer with a nonprofit of their choice. And so try to put policies and practices in place internally as well that reflect that sort of orientation towards mental health as a key company priority.
That's really impressive, Andy, and congratulations on the number of men you've been able to help through this work over the last few years. Andre, let me turn to you for a second. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey here? Like, what convinced you that this was an important area to invest in mental health when it came to the workplace?
Absolutely. So my entire career has really been, involved in public health and healthcare. And for me, early on in my career, one of the things that I really noticed, right, and for those of us who've been in public health, know the stresses and how strenuous the work can be, to build inside of communities. And one of the things that I noticed, not only affecting the actual, work performance, but one of the things that really stood out to me is that, when poor mental health starts creeping in and the work starts affecting, at that level, one of the things I started seeing from my colleagues is, them asking themselves, how valuable am I? How much is this working? Right. And that really kind of hit me hard, right? Because not only is it from the work perspective hard, but also when you're starting to internalize, and start to question your value and your effectiveness, that really kind of stood out to me. And that's always kind of carried on in my career. But also, more recently, after the George Floyd murder last year, the kind of trial and the kind of outcry that happened, as a Black man in America, this has always been something I've been thinking about, right? That's always kind of a low grade kind of concern and awareness, but something was different last year. And so for me, I started to feel my own mental health in jeopardy. And that's when I started thinking about the perspective around leadership and how important mental health was from a leadership perspective inside of companies, not only for that individual and for the group of leaders, but also how that trickles down into the organization. And this is something that oftentimes comes up, with the work that we're doing around search and talent, and how we, are stressing to our partners, how important it is to create a safe environment for employees to be there. So that's a little bit about my journey and just kind of being steeped in this space for so long, and now really understanding it from the internal, but also what we're doing at Onboard Health from an external perspective with our partners as well.
I'm curious to ask both of you, and I can completely understand how, Andre, as you were saying, external events, especially recent events, have really shifted like people's thinking about it, whether it's the reckoning that's, ongoing over racial injustice, or whether it's the pandemic itself or other economic realities that have changed. It does seem like for millions of people around our country that they're asking questions in a deeper way that they perhaps weren't asking before. Like what is, and their search for meaning and purpose is perhaps for many people even further deepened. But I think they're asking questions not just about the workplace, but about life more broadly. Like, am I living in the right place? Am I spending enough time with my family and friends? Am I investing enough in my own health and well-being? Am I doing what's truly fulfilling to me now, recognizing that many people have a heightened sense of the mortality after going through a pandemic that has claimed 750,000 lives. So this sort of taking stock, if you will, of where we are is not unusual given everything we have been through. But I do think it's making people ask new questions. And I'm curious if what you're seeing among the people that you care for, among the the workers that you interact with, have conversations with, like what are you sensing about what they're looking for and what their needs are and how those are evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I know from my lens, and just kind of being steeped in the mental and behavioral health space and innovation space for a long time, even with our with our staff and our team, one of the things that really just kind of stands out is the safe space to show up as themselves. And this is something that I've kind of taken from my own kind of career journey over the years as well. Life has changed, right? The past 18 months has completely shifted not only how we work, but how we see ourselves. And like you mentioned, how we value the time that we have here. And so for me, that's really affected us, with our small and growing team to really allow people to show up as themselves, right? Being able to be very specific around, creating platforms for people not only to talk about the work that they're doing, but what else is going on in their community, in their lives? What help is needed, right? What kind of wins are happening, right? Those are all different things that I take into account, because the lines that have traditionally been around work and life, right? We talk about the work-life balance piece, but that's blurred. And I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because this allows people to now be even more intentional about where they go to work, right? If I'm going to spend this amount of time in the workplace, that I better make sure that I'm aligned with how I'm working and the people and the mission, that sort of thing too. So this is so increasingly important, not only for us because of the work that we're doing around people and talent, but also this is just the shift that's happening, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon.
Absolutely. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think, everything that both of you have said resonates with our experience as well. And we actually did a survey in the summer of this past year to better understand what was going on in consumers' mindsets. And 78% of people reported that, they believe mental health is currently in a state of crisis in this country. And while 50% of consumers say they have themselves struggled with mental health this past year, only 29% have actually reached out to mental health professionals and or sought help and support. And so there's clearly a gap there. And I do think that, if we think about our own employees in our own company, time and how do you manage time and spend time, a little bit what Andre was talking about is really a salient issue. And on that dimension, one of the things that we've tried to do is provide, mental health days for folks and actually coordinate those at a company-wide level, because sort of what, we found that, if you're letting people sort of take that individually or one-off, people tend not to take it, or, there's work going on in the background. So if we can actually coordinate company time where people are able to sort of break and get some time off. Another thing that we've done is actually provided a bunch of sort of how-to modules around how to design your time. So, particularly for folks who are now working from home occasionally or in a remote environment, and there's this kind of continuum between, work and life, and how do you manage that? And so we've actually given some folks, access to tools and resources for how to actually design a schedule in a hybrid environment, and, basically take this concept of golden time where, you can block time in your calendar where you're not working because you're either, with your kids or exercising or doing something that's important to you. So little tools like that. And we have a mental health guide that we give to our employees, and it's sort of actually an interesting tracker because people go in and access it and fill out a little screener. And so it even gives us a pulse, like when there's more activity in there, we sort of know that it might be a time of higher stress in the company, and can, react accordingly. But I do think, time management as a set of tools, at least for our workforce, has been helpful.
Those are some really tangible tools, Andy. I appreciate you sharing that with everyone, and also just applaud you for taking the initiative to do that. It strikes me that even a few years ago, if you share some of those tools, people might think that, oh, that's going to reduce productivity in the workplace or take people away from work during productive hours. But I think the growing realization is that kind of flexibility that you're giving employees matters. In some sense, it's trusting them to get the job done, in a more flexible arrangement, which would allow them to potentially be with family during times during the day when they may need to pick a child up from school or attend to an elderly relative or simply do something that life requires sometimes during daytime hours. So I like that. In the time that we have left as we wind down, Andre, I was wondering if there are any sort of tips or tangible tools, like what Andy mentioned, that you'd like to share with the audience that you find helps to create a workplace that's better, more supportive of mental health and well-being.
Absolutely. Especially over the past several months, one of the things that just really bubbles to the surface for me, as a leader, as we're thinking about businesses and organizations, is make it your personal mission, right? To infuse mental health into how you show up and how you build across the company. I feel like, being able to tie mental health to your why, right? Especially if you're a mission-driven organization, that helps to set your North Star on how you treat people, how you want people to show up, and how people can be taken care of, in your workplace. And so I think also, when you make it your why and tie it to your making it a personal mission, it really kind of, allows you to start, learning more, right? Seeing what else is out there, right? The mental health first aid kind of, program that helps to bring in, actual expert, kind of curriculum to understand how to best learn. And also just understand what kind of, tools and products. There's, things that consumers are using like Headspace and Calm, and, plenty of those kind of places have opportunities to infuse that into the workplace setting. So, really just kind of tying it to your why, I think really helps to set the North Star for how you build the organization.
Well, that makes a great deal of sense, Andre. And Andy, I want to thank both of you for what you shared today. Just in wrapping this up, a couple of thoughts just to stick out. One is that if you're out there looking to see, is it possible to make the workplace an engine of mental health and well-being? I think what both Andy and Andre have shared is evidence and proof that yes, we can, in fact, make the workplace an engine of well-being. I think there are a couple of important considerations for us to keep in mind as we go about this. One is that it's always helpful to start with listening and understanding what our employees are thinking, how they're feeling, what they need. I think the second is to recognize that culture change is so much more important sometimes than policy change, and shifting how we think about, talk about mental health in the workplace is so important. This is where leadership by example makes such a difference, especially given the stigma we unfortunately still have around mental health and well-being. And the third is just when it comes to the kind of policies and structures we put in place, I think people are looking for more during this time than a bigger paycheck. So often in poll after poll, when people are asked, what are you looking for? Why did you quit your job? They come back to things like this: purpose. They're looking for a greater sense of purpose and meaning in their work. They talk about belonging, the fact that the connections they have with other people in the workplace, the community that's built actually means a lot and makes a huge difference. They talk about flexibility, not because they want to work less, but because they want to work better and be able to support their family, pursue the priorities that they have in some ways been reawakened to during this great pandemic, be able to do that and their job at the same time. So all of these elements that we've talked about today, I think, are not only an important part of creating a healthy workplace, they're eminently doable. It's not a journey that takes place overnight, but it's what one worth embarking on, because if workers are happy and healthier, mentally and physically, not only do they do more for the workplace, not only does that contribute to productivity and retention, but it helps lift up society overall, recognizing that positive mental health in the workplace spills over to the family, to the community, and it's part of what we really need more than ever right now. So Andy, Andre, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your leadership and your sharing some of those stories with us today. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.